Auggie Campbell. I'm the president and CEO of the West Houston Association, and I'm also chair of Harris Plus Flood Solutions. And we've put together a coalition called Houston Stronger. And for, I guess, about the past, well, we formed the 501c4 in January of this year. And the real goal is to bring together different institutions with different ideas on how to address the situations that we found our different communities in. We had a lot of emails on our flood control committee from our executive committee, from our members, who either flooded or they lived in neighborhoods that had seen substantial flooding. It's no secret that West Houston has been affected not just by Hurricane Harvey, but by the Texas Day floods and even by the Memorial Day floods. So I've spent a lot of time with Matt Zeev's colleagues, pretty much since I started. I started with the West Houston Association back in 2015, November. Before that, I was an assistant city attorney at the city of Houston for 7.5 years, and I worked on water rights issues. So I will say that back in 2009, there was flooding at the city, and then by 2011, the biggest issue I had was the drought. And I had actually just started at the city right before Hurricane Ike. So if we think that flooding is the only problem our community faces, we are wrong. Resiliency is more than flood control. It's remembering that all these things can happen to our community and making the right investments. We think that flood control is a very important investment. And it's not just us. So we got together with ACEC, which is the engineering group, Greater Houston Builders Association, Houston Realtors, a whole bunch of people. You see all the names up there. We have a monthly meeting. We have about 27 institutions that come to our meeting. At our last meeting, we had Congressman Culberson. He was, as Matt Zeev said, instrumental in getting $141 billion that we need to rebuild communities. And it's not just Texas. There are 22 other states and territories that can potentially access this money, and I'll talk together. But just to go back to Houston Stronger and talk about what we are trying to do as an organization. We're trying to develop goals and processes to make sure that we get the funding that we need from the federal government, state government, and local government. We're also trying to come up with some ideas on how we can present to these different agencies, because we have some amazingly intelligent people who are, engineers, architects. There's a range of different professions who can really bring a lot of good ideas to the conversation. And I think one of the things that I've been so impressed with from the county especially is their ability to take good ideas, and often they've already had the ideas, and they can tell us what they've done on them. So that's really heartening for us. The other thing is working through the legal framework. Matt talked about how on June 12th, there will be a vote by the Harris County Commissioners Court for this $2.5 billion in funding. There's been a conversation with, literally tens of organizations looking at the proposed order, making sure that we have good language to present to voters. And I think, again, the county has really done a great job of involving different stakeholders in that process. And then political consensus. If you flooded, you weren't a Republican or a Democrat, you were someone who wanted government to work. And I think that's what we all want. And that's really what unites our organization. If you go back, you can see that, we have Houston Wilderness, National Association of Minority Contractors, and then there are a lot of groups who participate who, for one reason or another, I don't have the permission to put their logos up there, but they're very involved, and they've done a great job of providing us with good information so we can have a conversation about plans like this. Now, we've talked a little bit about the $2.5 billion bond. I'm here to tell you that that is a small down payment on what we need to truly fix flooding in our area. To provide a 100-year level of protection to the entirety of Harris County takes at least $35 billion. if you want to fix flooding in the region and storm surge, the price tag on that, based on our estimates, and I'm just a lawyer. I didn't come up with these. We have a bunch of engineers and other professionals who developed these models. It's $58 billion. There are a lot of concepts that we need to talk about. We can do a lot with the existing infrastructure that we have, and we'll talk more about that. But if we don't get the funding and we don't move on these ideas quickly, we will miss a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to at least do something that will make sure that we're safer and we can tell the world we're not we've not gone from space city to flood city. So I talked about the $141 billion for disasters. As Matt said, the communities who will get their share of $141 billion are those communities that have a local match. The city has applied for money, much like the county, for home buyouts, and has a much harder time getting them because they don't have that local match. There will be CDBG funding. Maybe it'll come in November, but if you were there in Hurricane Ike, you know that the city of Houston was promised billions in CDBG funding. We still have not, the city of Houston has still not received it. And a lot of it is because you have to go through the National Disaster Recovery Framework, aka the Stafford Act. And, you know, Judge Emmett talked about how he is, you know, the on-the-ground official that reports under this process. You have, you know, the mayor has appointed Marvin Odom. And at the state level, John Sharp, the chancellor in A&M, is the state coordinating officer. So all of this money that Matt talked about has to flow through this process. And so it comes down, and you'll see that there are various matches. I mean, this is a great chart, and if you look at it long enough, you see that there are some great opportunities, and then there are some buckets that are going to be a lot harder for us. So one of the things that we've talked to Matt about a lot is, you know, leveraging these dollars, because $2.5 billion is not $35 billion, and you can leverage it so we get a lot closer. In fact, you know, Matt's already and his associates have come up with a way to leverage $1 billion to between $4 and $5 billion, and that's a great start. But when you need $35 billion to fix the problem, we're hoping we can do more, and you need money, you know, not just to complete everything on this list. I will say that this is a great start, and I encourage all of you to go and look at this. And one thing I will point out about this is this fixes a lot of floodplain issues. 68% of the flooding, and y'all were here yesterday, and Jeff Linder pointed this out, 68% of the flooding occurred outside of the floodplain. So even if we fix these channels, that doesn't mean we fix flooding. And so the city is working hard on an approach. They've come up with some ideas to negotiate to get different funding streams, but it's going to be hard unless they have the dedicated funding they get right now from Rebuild Houston. That's going to be back on the ballot in November, and if they don't have that, they're going to have nothing for a local match, or the local match that they can anticipate reasonably will be gone. So basically, without Rebuild Houston, this timeline goes away, or at least is substantially different. Now, when we've been, the reason I'm up on the stage is because we have a dollar amount. We have a plan with a price tag. That doesn't mean this is the end-all be-all plan. If you ask me if I thought this is exactly what we were going to do, I would say absolutely not. This is a model, you know, and all models are wrong, but some are useful. And this is very useful for having a conversation about the level of protection that our community should have and the amount of money it'll take to get there. So if we're talking about level of protection, we've designed historically for probable maximum rainfall. And the only time that we've really developed a plan that would guard against probable maximum rainfall was the 1940 plan put out by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And so they anticipated back then that probable maximum rainfall would be 34 inches. And there's some folks in the audience who know these numbers much better than I do. So I'm not going to get into this too much, except to say that, you know, that was relatively close to the storm event that fell on top of Addicks and Barker. The problem is that the reservoirs didn't catch all the water that they were supposed to catch. And if we're talking about what we would like to see on our bayous, we'd like to see Sims Bayou. Now, there were 6,000 homes that flooded in the Sims Bayou watershed, but none of those homes flooded due to riverine flooding. It was local drainage issues. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, but and that's because we paid for a 100-year flood event. I mean, it's 12 inches in 24 hours. So we think that if we can equip our major channels to provide that 100-year level of protection, 12 inches in 24 hours, we can avoid major riverine flooding. That doesn't mean we fix the problem. We've also talked a lot about a third reservoir. Third reservoir, this is Plan 5 that was developed by the Harris County Flood Control District. The West Houston Association, Katy Prairie Conservancy were very involved in that study. I think all of us today think that it needs further consideration. And there's a 216 study that the Corps hopefully will fund. The Flood Control District's already put up its money, so we can look further at this. One thing that we think we can do is work with existing infrastructure. If you have to buy out upstream and downstream of Addicks and Barker Reservoir, that costs approximately $6 billion. We think there's a better way to take care of this. If you were to excavate 6 feet out of Addicks and 10 feet out of Barker reservoirs on average, then that would allow for the rain that fell during Harvey, so 110,000 acre feet in Barker or 210,000 acre feet in Barker and 200,000 acre feet in Addicks to be caught on government-owned land. By excavating, you're also going to expand the base of the reservoir and prevent that catastrophic flood event where basically the water pushes over the berm and all that water equalizes out over, over Memorial, River Oaks, and to the ship channel downtown. We've been planning for a long time. There are some great ideas, and we're getting back to some of them. Bayou Greenways 2020 really picked up on the Comey plan that was developed back in 1912. And we think that there are a lot of benefits from doing this. And one of them is if we get homes and we provide space on both sides of the bayou, we do less of this. I don't want to ever do things like this again. I don't know about y'all. So that will require a lot of buyouts. And, if you want to see more about the buyout process, go to the Harris County Flood Control District website. They have the best buyout program in the nation. The issue is, as Christoph pointed out, is to work with the City of Houston and the Harris County Community Services Department to provide replacement affordable housing. And that will be a huge challenge. And we're very encouraged by the way that the Flood Control District and different agencies are working on that problem. So as Christoph said, strategic buyouts are a great way to go forward. If we have checkerboarding, we can't do that. So we also need to concentrate on certain areas. You see that, and this information is now outdated. I didn't have the benefit of the report that Jeff put out yesterday whenever I came up with this presentation. But still, you can notice that, Cypress had many, many flooded homes and essentially doesn't have the protection that it needs. So we think we need about $8.5 billion in strategic buyouts to provide this 100-year level of protection. And when you build it, we think it should be in this sort of configuration, using geofluvial morphology and, trying to use native vegetation. So again, this is not going to work in every neighborhood. I mean, there are going to be areas where maybe a flood tunnel is a better idea. I'm not saying that we have all the answers. We want to engage with the folks who do and make sure that we have good plans. We think the Flood Control District's done a great job with their idea behind buyouts and their channel configuration. In fact, a lot of the things that I showed you on the screen, they've already incorporated on their Little Cypress Creek projects and in other projects on Langham Creek. So we know how to do that. We also know that there are other benefits just besides flood protection. The treatment that we're talking about will provide the same sort of benefits that Bayou Greenways 2020 provided. So that's $90 million for the Bayou Greenways 2020 project. That was a $110 million bond project. So I'm not going to say that we'll get the same level of benefit on every watershed, but we're still talking about projects that will reduce our overall health spending and will also improve property values in areas that have a need to improve. So we hope for a lot of coordination. We also hope to make sure that we get flood funding back up. Back in 2000, for every $100 evaluation that we had, 8 cents of that went to flood control. Today, that number is less than 2.8 cents evaluation. We're going the wrong way. So if we don't vote on August 25th to provide for this $2.5 billion in capital funding, we're never going to get those numbers back where they need to be, or it's going to be unlikely that we will. And we've been talking about this for a long time. West Houston Association, back in our 2050 plan, we said back then that we drastically underfund flood control. We had there have been a lot of plans to really improve our bayous, and we think those need to be taken seriously. And we need to build what the flood control district already has on the books. They have some fantastic projects. They need to be funded. And we need to look at these reservoirs that are potentially out there. But I have to tell you, this third reservoir will take at least 15 years to build, and that's Usain Bolt speed. We are not going to build this quickly, even if everybody agrees. And I have to say that Katy Prairie Conservancy makes some very compelling arguments about why we need to be very careful whenever we build it. We also need to remember that hurricanes aren't just about rain. So we need storm surge protection. I don't think this is a perfect project, but I do think that there's been some good work done, and we need to look at other potential solutions. We also need to look at the Brazos River too. Don't forget, this isn't just a Harris County issue. This is a regional issue, and we want to support Brazos County. And also, if you're going to solve Harris County's issues, you have to start in Montgomery County and build that Montgomery County reservoir system or something that has similar impact. I talked about local drainage a few times. We estimate that'll cost $6 billion to take care of those issues. Port of Houston needs substantial assistance. Freeport actually just passed a bond referendum. I think it's $130 million instead of $140 million, but that's great news, and we need other communities. Fort Bend will have a bond election in 2019, we anticipate. We will need more study in certain areas. We just haven't got around to it. So if y'all have ideas, we'd love to hear from you. These are where we are at so far in our conversation. We'd like you to be a part of it. If you'd like to learn more, go to HoustonStronger.net and send us your questions and your ideas. We'd like to hear them. Thank you.